Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Joseph Ryder Anderson podcast. I am your host, Joseph Anderson himself, and today we have a super special episode focused on Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, the new set coming out very soon from Union Arena. This is a set that tons of people, I've been hearing from so many people. I'm going to start playing Union Arena when Fullmetal Alchemist comes out. So it's a set people are very, very excited about. And from my first look through of the decks in this set, it actually appears to be a very well-rounded set. I don't think there's anything in here that's crazy strong that's going to break the meta, obviously, but there's nothing crazy weak either. There's a lot of great options. I think there's something for everybody in this set, so I'm excited to go over this with you. And before we go into this, I think I want to give a little bit of background about the best way to use these lists and these guides. So we're going to be looking at this list that's on josephryderanderson.com, and this is ranking all of the different Fullmetal Alchemist decks. I don't want to give the impression that one thing I think people get confused is they look at this and they go, oh, there's this that you should change, that you should change. But the idea here is not so much to look at these decks like these are fully optimized decks. They're not. As time goes on, from my own testing with these decks, or as tournaments happen and we get a better sense of how most optimally to play these decks, what actually happens on the site is these lists get updated. So a good example where this has happened, if you go over to Union Arena decks, you look at, let's go to sort of our online decks, where this has changed pretty dramatically since when this list first came out. The ranking order has changed a little bit. We have optimal lists on here, right? So decks from actual tournaments that have done well. So we're trying to build a really strong repository here of information to help you play these decks most optimally too. However, when a set first comes out, we're more just talking about the mechanics behind a deck, and that's not going to change a ton. Like a single card or combo coming in isn't going to change the core mechanics of what a deck's all about. And that's what we're discussing in these videos, is we're discussing how these core mechanics stack up and how they're going to do in the greater Union Arena meta, as well as the rare battle format. Rare battles are a huge part of Union Arena, so we do often want to talk about how decks stack up in that format. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in to the first deck on this list, and that is the blue Armstrong deck. So this deck is really interesting. I laugh a little bit because I think the one thing that I struggle with this deck is it's definitely has some really interesting plays to it. And I think people who tend to like the raidless decks and raidless strategies are going to particularly like this deck, because there's a lot of raidless plays and a lot of like full front attack focus, where if you love decks that are really focused on that attack level of the game, not so much on getting rid of things, not so much on like complex combos, you might really like this deck. It's a lot like the characters in the show. They're just all out aggression. It's also a lot like the blue Rukia Bleach deck. So if you're familiar with the blue Rukia Bleach, it's like that. It's trying to reward you for having these 2 action point characters on the field. I think there's some inherent limitations around that. Typically, if you can play a card for 1 action point, it's better than a card you can play for 2. And it takes a lot for that to not be the case. It takes a lot for the 2 action points to be worth it. However, in this deck, there are lots of ways that you can restand action points. You get some aggression, like with this Olivier raid character. You can, when played, she switches Briggs affinity characters to active, but then when attacking, you may place 1 card from your hand into your sideline. If you do, choose up to 1 character on your field with 2 or more base AP costs and switch it to active. So you can use this to switch your Alex Armstrongs to active and just keep pummeling through these punishing attacks, which I think is a really cool strategy. I think that could be super fun. I think one thing that's a little odd about this particular raid, though, is that this switch all Briggs affinity characters on your field to active sounds actually really, really strong. However, you don't really have like hardly any Briggs characters that are worth switching to active. I think the only one who's really strong is this Buccaneer character. So it's a little odd. I think probably volume 2 there's gonna be more Briggs characters. It's a little odd having that as your win played when you're really just switching Buccaneer as the only one that's really of merit. So it's an interesting strategy for sure. I think one card worth noting is this Fort Briggs site card. Sites are just continuing to become more and more a part of the game. And this Fort Briggs site, 2 action point card, but you get to reduce the AP cost of the next Briggs affinity card you use from your hand this turn by 1. So that's sort of like it's sort of like giving you an AP back by playing it, I guess, is really what that's doing. And then if you switch it to resting, you can activate this ability if a card with 2 or more base AP costs has been played onto your field this turn. Draw a card. You can only activate this ability once each turn. So you get to draw a card each turn if you're playing a 2 action point character each turn. There's plenty of those in this deck, so that makes it pretty feasible that you're going to do that. I think if this guy, I think a couple things that would make this deck better is if this Armstrong character was a Briggs character. I feel like this deck would have a lot more synergy. Either of these guys would make this deck a lot stronger, so I'm not sure why they weren't given Briggs affinities. It just feels like this is a little lacking, so maybe in Volume 2 we'll get more support that makes this deck a bit stronger, but right now it is the weakest deck in the Fullmetal Alchemist lineup. Moving on. So if you're listening to this, by the way, check out the show notes. I'm going to include a link to the guide that I'm going through here. If you're just listening to this on your podcast player, this will be linked to the guide on the website, so you can follow along as you're listening to this. But the next up is the yellow Jing deck, and this deck is actually super interesting. I really kind of like what this deck is going for. It's really focused on something that we've not seen before, where characters gain abilities. I guess we've seen it a little bit, like in Kurapika, but not so much of a focus on this having characters gain abilities based on your energy line. So if you hit 7 energy on your energy line, your characters get these pretty significant buffs that make them significantly stronger. And one of the ways that makes it easy to do this is with the Mei Chang card. You raid her, and she gains an energy generation to become a 3 energy gen character, and you also get to draw a card, assuming that you've played her to the energy line, which you are going to want to do. And that's a pretty solid like energy gen character. It's an interesting play. There's a couple of these support oriented raid characters in Fullmetal Alchemist in general, which we haven't seen a lot of, so it's interesting to see that. And she just makes it a lot easier to hit that 7 energy cost. Otherwise, I think the main weakness of this deck is that the payoff doesn't seem quite there. I think if you think about like other decks that have high energy cost, for example, the Code Geass Green Lancelot deck, for just 1 more energy you can play, for just 1 more energy than what you're trying to reach in this deck, you can play an Air Cavalry, which is sidelining a character, and then you get an attacker with damage 2 and impact 1. That's a really high payoff, a much higher payoff, just as for comparison's sake, than what you get for this deck. I think let's look at some of these cards. Ling Yao, you get 6 or more energy, drop to 1 card when played, and then when attacking, choose up to 1 other Jing Affinity card in your field. It gains cannot be blocked by 4,000 or more BP, which is a handy ability. Decks like this can do really well. I think one deck that's been doing well recently that focuses on this is a blue Ichigo deck, but it's not like a game-changing ability. It's not the strongest ability in the world. You do also have this Scar card. 2 action point character comes in active. Choose one character in your opponent's front line and switch it to resting. If you have 7 or more energy gen, this character gains 1,000 BP and impact until the end of the turn. That's okay, but 5,000 BP character with impact, you can get that in other decks that don't have to necessarily ramp up. I guess it is sort of rare to have a 5,000 BP character with impact. But for example, Kenpachi, I think he does the same thing. If you raid him over a 4-cost character, he boosts 1,000. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's other characters that can do this kind of stuff that are a little bit easier to play. Although the choose up to 1 character in your opponent's front line, switch it to resting is kind of nice. Having that bundled in, that could definitely create some openings. So again, pretty strong, but just nothing crazy. I think that's what I'm getting at. It doesn't really make me feel like I really want to run, like it's really worthwhile trying to hit that 7 energy cost. When attacking, this is kind of cool, especially in the rare battle format. Your opponent places 2 cards from their sideline on the bottom of their deck in any order. This is a powerful counter to the Homunculus deck, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And it can be a counter to the Elric Brothers deck. These decks that really want to have certain cards in their sideline, you can mess with that a bit by playing this Scar. So you may actually want to run this Scar. This list I'm sharing runs him at 2. You may want to find room for more of him because he is a pretty strong card. But actually, arguably your strongest card, I find this very interesting, because your strongest card is Greed, but he actually has nothing to do with the 7 energy cost strategy. He doesn't gain any added benefits from having 7 energy cost. He's a 6 energy cost character, but he is your strongest character. He has this effect that when you play him, your opponent cannot block him. Must block him if able until the end of the turn. That's essentially the same thing as Gurren, but it doesn't have the impact, so that's kind of a bummer. You may place one card from your hand into your sideline if you do play up to one Ling Yao character with 4 or less required energy and 1 AP cost from your sideline set to rest under your field. That's decent, but nothing here is going like, oh yeah, crazy strong. And it's still your strongest card. So I think that it's just my problem with this deck is there's a lot of other decks in Fullmetal Alchemist that can do more with less. So unless if you're just crazy about these characters and crazy about this strategy, you're probably going to want to go with one of these decks that's just giving you more value. Moving on to the next deck on this list, and this one's actually pretty cool. This is the Purple King Bradley deck, and this deck is focused on a couple things. You're mostly focused, let's go check this out in the builder. You're mostly focused on the Kimberly character and the King Bradley character, and these two work pretty well together. So let's start with the Kimberly. He's pretty cool, very strong in the show and obviously in the game too. And he's your removal character. So when played, you can choose up to one character with 3,000 BP or less in your opponent's front line and sideline it. That may not sound like a lot, but there's a lot of cards in this deck, including King Bradley, that are able to drop opposing characters by 1,000 BP. So this character essentially is sidelining 4,000 BP characters when played. That's fantastic. Also, you can place one Philosopher's Stone, which is your final, from your sideline into your removal area. If you do, this character gains impact 1. That's pretty cool. So assuming you've played one of your finals, you can give Kimberly impact. So not like the craziest card in the world, but definitely a handy removal option for this deck. And then your strongest character is the King Bradley. And he is going to come in, assuming you raid him, he's going to come in as a 5,000 BP character with double attack. He does have this effect that lets you minus an opposing character by 1,000 BP until the end of the turn. And again, that works really well with that Kimberly raid option. So this deck is definitely a combination of just offensive aggression and removal. And those two combined, it's a lot like Integrity Knights, if you know that deck. If you combine those two, you can pull off some pretty amazing things, but it does suffer a little bit from not being hyper focused on either one. So we're not going too much into the multi-attack. We just have one double attacker outside of Father. And it's not going too heavy into removal because you just have that one removal character who is decent removal, not exceptional removal. So this is sort of like a second tier sort of deck situation here. I think one interesting thing, one character that really stands out to me in this deck strategy is the Pride character. And I think one little side note I will make about purple in general is it seems like a lot of these cards are kind of complementary. Sometimes in an energy color, the strategies are so stark that you would never put them together. But in the purple Fullmetal Alchemist, they're actually kind of complementary. I could see you putting Pride in a homunculus deck, right? Like it could work really well in there, especially with this effect that sidelines, but it feels especially strong in this deck. So you sideline a Kimberly card or a character with 4 more required energy, and then this guy is boosting to a 5,000 BP character with impact, which is pretty insane for a 3-cost character. So this guy is just a phenomenal multi-purpose tool for this deck. You can have him on your energy line, helping you play those stronger cards. You can bump him up, take some powerful attacks. Just a really solid card, and it's going to help you reach that threshold that then can enable you to play Father. So this is not the main deck focused on Father. We'll get to that in a minute. But this guy is pretty easy. You can bring him back from your sideline. If you have 20 more cards in your sideline, you can bring him back and to your hand, and then you can play him, comes in active, sidelines a character, has double attack. He's just a powerful tool, and he's not doing much. Like he's not hurting you by having him, right? Because he can just chill in your sideline. You don't even have to have him in your hand. He's not even taking up room in your hand. You just have him chill in your sideline until he's needed. He may not be needed. He might be needed. You're not focusing on too much on getting cards in the sideline with this deck, but he can just be there in this strategy to back you up if you happen to hit that threshold. So pretty interesting deck overall. I think it's definitely more of a tier 2 type of deck, but I think it could be fun for people who just like the aggression side of it. Moving on now to where we're getting to the much stronger decks. So these next 3 are going to be your top decks, and I think the top 2 especially could go either way, being the best deck. But we're really getting into a whole different level of deck here with Blue Roy Mustang, and this deck I think is going to be super popular. It just has like so much of the stuff in it that people like from playing playing Union Arena. It also doesn't hurt that Roy Mustang is a pretty badass character that people tend to like. But this deck is really, surprise, focused on Roy Mustang. He's a 5 energy cost character, which is pretty reasonable given how strong he is. And the whole gimmick here, I shouldn't say gimmick, the whole mechanic here, this is not a gimmick, this is a strong strategy. The whole mechanic here is that you're removing cards from your hand to the sideline. So you're discarding cards, I should say, not removing. You're discarding cards from your hand to increase the range of this BP removal effect. So it starts at 1,000 and you gain 1,000 in range for every card you discard. And you have powerful cards that lower BP, opposing characters' BP, to make that effect go a lot farther. And then you gain advantages in this deck strategy from having not very many cards in your hand. So as you discard those cards, your goal really is to kind of get to like basically no cards in your hand. For example, here, Roy Mustang then becomes an Impact 1 character. So the closest card I can think of to Roy Mustang is probably that 5-cost Ichigo. The 5-cost Ichigo, admittedly, is a little bit more consistent because you're just pulling from the sideline. You don't need to combo it. You don't need to amass a big hand. But once you play Ichigo, he's essentially just a 4,000 BP body. Roy Mustang is not the case. He has impact if you don't have any cards in your hand. And also, his ability is not triggered when played. I think it's an important distinction. If your opponent is not able to get rid of him, he can just keep removing characters each and every turn. That's his strongest selling point. So this really puts the pressure on your opponent to get rid of this guy and expend their resources to get rid of this guy before he can just keep wreaking havoc on their field. So that's the main strategy here. I think the one weird thing is that I didn't see a card, there's not really a color trigger that massively fits this deck, which I think is interesting. You do have this Maze Hughes, which is a pretty good card. Place 1 card from your hand to the sideline. This character gains 1,000 BP till the end of the turn. That's okay. So you can boost to 4,000 BP if you need to. And if you have 2 cards or less in your hand, draw a card, win sideline. I guess that's okay, right? Like this does play into the whole getting rid of cards from your hand, but this color trigger is not like phenomenally important to your deck strategy. So I think that's one shortcoming. And the blue color trigger is not bad, right? Being able to bounce a character with 3,500 less BP is not a bad color trigger. So it would have been nice maybe to have this guy be something a little more core to the strategy. But yeah, this guy's pretty cool too. This raidless Roy Mustang, if you have 2 or less cards in your hand, this character gains 1,000 BP, so 5,000 BP character. If you have no cards in your hand, drop to 1 card when attacking. That's handy. I like that as a raidless option. So yeah, just a solid deck overall. I think you're going to see a ton of these around, and you're probably you're definitely going to see this just all over the place once the rare battles start. Now moving on to what I think are the top 2 decks, and I think either one of these you could make the argument is the top deck. And we're going to be looking at the purple Father deck or the Homunculus deck, whatever you want to call it. It does center around the Father character. Let's go talk about this a bit more. Pop into the builder. Really, the real core character. This might sound funny. We'll talk about Father because that's what this whole deck is building up to Father. But he's not necessarily the backbone of the deck, the engine behind the deck. But you are trying to get to 20 inside line. If you were a fan of the Muzan strategy from Demon Slayer and a little disappointed in it like I was, you might like this Father deck because this is a much, much stronger deck that has a similar sort of strategy. You're trying to get to 20 cards in your sideline just like with Muzan. And then Father, you can play Father, but the Father comes in active, which is a huge difference. So you don't need to prep him for a turn. You can just play him from your hand once you hit that 20 cards in sideline threshold. You can also bring him back from your sideline, so you don't need to hold on to him if it's not, you discard cards a lot in this deck, so you don't need to hold on to him in your hand. You can relatively easily bring him back from your sideline into your hand. And then when you play him, you get to sideline a character, and then he has double attack. Just a really powerhouse card. It would be so fun to play this. And because of all the options you have to discard cards and to add cards into your sideline in this deck, I don't think he's going to be very hard to get out. I think he's going to be pretty easy, relatively easy, as far as control decks go, to get this character out. But the real backbone of the deck isn't Father. The real backbone is the Lust engine. She's going to be letting you draw 2 cards and then sideline 2 cards from your hand, discard 2 cards from your hand. And then if you have 10 or more cards in your sideline, you get to draw a card. So you get to draw 3, discard 2. That's it's basically Rukia, right, from Purple Bleach. And we all know how quickly that card can get your sideline built up. It's going to be the same thing with Lust. And then she has this when sidelined, you return up to 1 base card of this ready character to your hand. So you can bring back, especially if you've rated on top of this 3-cost Lust, when played, she's going to let you look at the top card of your deck. And if it's a homunculus, you may reveal it, add it to your hand. Otherwise, place it on top of your deck or into your sideline. So you get a free sideline here or a free card in your hand, and you can just keep playing her over and over and recycle her. The same way you do with Lancelot, the Lancelot raid that lets you recycle the 3-cost Suzaku. That's a really powerful effect, and that's going to be the case here with Lust, 4-cost Lust. You do also have this Envy card, which is really strong, and I think that's one of the really strong selling points. Unlike Muzan, where you're just sidelining your own cards to try to hit 20, and you don't have much game while you're doing that. You have plenty of solid attackers and defenders in this deck that you can battle at your opponent while trying to build up to 20 in sideline. And one of those is Envy. This character gains impact until the end of the turn when he's played. When attacking, draw cards sideline 1. You're going to see more cards this way. You're going to be able to get more cards into your sideline thanks to this when attacking. And then when sideline, you have a defensive effect here. So when sideline, choose up to one character on your opponent's front line and switch it to resting. That's super cool. Great way to stall out your opponent while you're trying to get to 20 cards in sideline. You have a couple of raid options for the Envy. You have the 0-cost, but I think the better one is actually this 2-cost Envy, who can act as any raid target for any of your raid characters. And then if you have 10 or more cards in your sideline, he's going to be switching a 3,000 or less BP character to resting. Just a really strong card all around. So I just really like this deck. You have this poor Nina and Alexander. So sad. So sad this is a card, but it's a good card. When played, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, place any number of them on the top of your deck in any order, then place any remaining cards into your sideline. If this character is ready to draw a card, wow, that's amazing. So you can just right away pop 2 cards into your sideline. Like, that's amazing. And then you get a draw card. And also, if you've rated this character, you get an added energy gen on your energy line. This deck's going to get 20 cards in sideline so quickly between this and Lust. It's just going to be crazy. So, and then again, as if that weren't enough, you do have this Homunculi card. Place the top 2 cards of your deck into your sideline, and you can bring back a purple character with Homunculus Affinity. So you can bring that card back into your hand and play it again. So, wow, just amazing. I think you could make the argument this is going to be the top 2 deck from this set. But I do think there's one that's just going to be a little more consistent, a little bit more successful, and that's the yellow Elric Brothers deck. And luckily for you, you can build this from the starter deck. You're going to have to upgrade it, of course, like you always have to. And we'll talk about that soon. Not in this podcast, but we'll talk about it on the website, so stay tuned for that. But this is a really solid deck. It's kind of a buddy deck. That's what I'm just calling it. This type of Union Arena deck that's focused more on interactions between specific cards. Other buddy decks you can think of are the Yellow Tanjiro, where you have the Tanjiro Nezuko interaction, or you can think about the Integrity Knights, which plays between Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Alice. So this deck is playing off between Edward, Alphonse, and the Gateway of Truth primarily. So, but really between Edward and Alphonse, just like in the show. This is a beautiful way to depict that relationship, which I think if anybody who has a brother can relate to this show. You know, it's just all about brotherly love and, you know, the things that happen when you lose your body when you're casting spells. So we can all relate to that. I think the strongest play here, I think you have some interesting plays, but I think one of the strongest plays is using this 4-cost Edward Elric. So let's take a look at this guy a little more in the builder. But this guy, I think, is really, to me, your strongest card. You can play him during your turn. He has 500 BP. When played, shoots up to one of the following. So you can, if you don't really have anything to do with the Alphonse, you can just draw 2 cards and then place 1 card into your sideline. That's really strong, just that. And then the other one is, if it's your turn, you may play 1 Alphonse card with 3 or less required energy from your sideline set to rest down to the field. If you do, Edward becomes unrated. And the card that's the best to play with that is the 4-cost Alphonse. Assuming you have Gateway of Truth on the field, he becomes a 3-cost character in the sideline, has Nullify Impact, and then when played, you can pay 1 AP to choose. And if you played him via this effect, he switches to active, so you get another 4,000 BP character, and so you're basically swarming the board here by doing this with strong attackers, and you can choose up to 1 character on your opponent's front line and switch it to resting. Wow. So you're not only are you swarming the board, you are slowing your opponent down. You're switching your opponent's cards to resting, creating holes in their defenses. So it's a super strong card. Speaking of holes in your defenses, you have this Roy Mustang, a typical 4-cost 2-action point removal character. He's only removing characters with 3,000 or less BP, but you get the kicker of they go to the removal area, which is super strong. Especially in the rare battle format, you're going to love this because so many decks focus on having specific cards in their sideline, you can really mess with your opponent's strategy by getting rid of those cards from the game altogether. So I think this is really strong. I'm running this as a two count, but you could probably run more of those. You also have this handy Let's Go Home. Add up to 1 Edward, Elric, or Alphonse from your sideline to your hand, and then play up to 1 Edward or Alphonse with fulfilled energy cost, yada yada, from your hand set to resting, or perform raid with it. So you get to bring a card back and then play a card. So this effectively is just like a freak play. Like you're not you're not expending an action point to play this. You can think of this as just a free card. So you might even run more than 2. This is a really strong card for an event. And it's nice to see that, because a lot of times it's hard to justify working in events into your deck. But this is just a really strong card. It's called Let's Go Home. Very strong. And then let's talk a little bit about this 4-cost Edward Elric. Impact 1, he lets you search the top 6 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 card or character site among them, and add it to your hand. That's really strong, especially as it's any character or site card. So you can use this to get any character that you might need, and you can also use it to get that Gateway of Truth, which is a really strong site. We'll talk about that in a second. If you do this, though, Edward does become unrated. One little error in my list, I'm probably going to go and fix this. I would probably run this Alphonse. We can talk about him, the 1-cost Alphonse, because he's just so good. You can use him to switch to resting sideline. The only reason I didn't include him is because he does remove some board presence, but you get so much board presence with this deck, it's probably not an issue. But he's a 1-cost, 2500 BP character, which I love. Active trigger. Switch to resting sideline this card. Place 1 Edward Elric card with raid from your sideline face up under a non. So basically, I'm not even read all that because that sounds confusing. But essentially, you use this effect and then you make your Edward rated again. So both of your Edward Elric raids, they become unrated if you use certain effects, but you can, by using this Alphonse character, you sacrifice them and they become rated again. So you get the benefit of that effect and you don't lose the raid. It's really strong. So you definitely should be running that. That's an error because my list on the site does not have that. So I will be fixing that, but very strong. And then I think we should take a moment to talk about this Gateway of Truth card. So this site cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. That's important, especially with the likes of Mechamaru running around, right, from JJK. That card, I believe that card is capable of removing sites even with 2-gen. So not being able to be chosen by your opponent's abilities, holy cow, that's strong, right? Like this set, you're just basically guaranteed to have this card on your field. And that's important if you read the effect, when played, if Edward Elric or Alphonse is on your field, draw 2 cards, then place 2 cards from your hand into your sideline. Super strong. You want certain cards in your sideline, so having to sacrifice them is not a big deal in this deck. Activate main, switch to resting, place 1 card from your life into your sideline. That's a bummer. But if you do, look at the top 6 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 character card among them, and add it to your hand. Place your remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. This deck, I don't see you using that unless if you really have to, but definitely in a pinch, you can use that and get a card that is super important to your strategy. And of course, it's a 2 energy gen site, so that's always excellent to have around. I think this deck's just going to be super consistent, honestly. I think it's going to be consistent. I think it's going to be strong, and I think it's going to be super popular. I think this deck will probably make its way up into the top tier for a while. I think the only other deck that can hold a candle to it in this particular set really is that Homunculus deck. I think this deck could end up doing even better. It's just got so much going for it. I think it's really just going to depend on how reliably you can get Father out, but I think these two are going to be the 2 big decks to watch for in the Fullmetal Alchemist, post Fullmetal Alchemist standard format, store format, as well as just in the Union Arena Rare Battle format. All in all, though, what a set. This is definitely, for people who've been waiting for this set to come out, I can't imagine you being disappointed with a lineup of decks and cards like this. Like, it's really delivering everything fans want from a set like this. And each one of these decks is playable for sure. None of these are throwaway decks. I think, other than maybe the Blue Armstrong is just not quite there yet. But otherwise, super, super strong decks. Hope you appreciated that. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope it helps you decide what deck that you're going to build when this set comes out. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait for it myself. And it should be a great set to bring with you to store tournaments and bag some of those fantastic new winner cards. Until next time, this was the Joseph Ryder Anderson podcast. Subscribe, like, appreciate you. Catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.